Ivanka Trump thought she could throw a comment and control the room. Samuel L. Jackson proved her wrong with words, so direct the entire audience could only watch in stunned silence. It was a chilly evening in Washington, D.C., the kind of night, with the city hums with a quiet energy full of people rushing between buildings, political offices, and important events. Inside a prestigious hall, the atmosphere was entirely different, calm, expectant, and charged with curiosity. The event was billed as a discussion on leadership, honesty, and the state of the country under President Donald Trump. Invitations had been sent to politicians, journalists, public figures, and a select audience eager to hear insights from some of the most recognizable voices in America. But no one could have predicted the moment that was about to unfold. Samuel L. Jackson had been invited as one of the key speakers. Known for his bold personality and unmistakable presence, Jackson had a reputation for speaking his mind without hesitation. People knew him from the screen, commanding, larger than life, unforgettable. But seeing him in a real-world discussion was something entirely different. As he walked into the hall, there was a sense that something significant was about to happen. Even the most composed attendees could feel it, though they weren't sure why. Jackson moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence. There was no rush, no pretense. Just the calm assurance of someone who had faced challenges far greater than a room full of influential people. His eyes scanned the audience, not just to acknowledge them, but to understand them. And then, as if by instinct, they landed on one particular person, Ivanka Trump. She was seated in the front row, poised and self-assured. Her presence radiated a kind of controlled energy, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how the public perceives you. Her faint smile suggested she was ready for the conversation, perhaps even confident she could guide it in her favor. But Samuel L. Jackson was not someone to follow a script dictated by anyone else, no matter how prominent. There was something in the way he looked at her, a mixture of curiosity, firmness, and challenge, that made the room feel suddenly smaller, as if everyone had been drawn into a quiet bubble where only he and Ivanka existed. The audience didn't fully realize it yet, but this was the calm before a storm. The moment before words would pierce through the formal setting and leave everyone frozen in attention. People had come expecting a polite discussion about ideas and policy, but they were about to witness something far more compelling. Jackson's presence alone brought a sense of unpredictability. His history, both on-screen and off, carried a reputation for honesty and fearlessness. Audiences knew that when he spoke from experience and principle. That made the room tense, but it also made it electric. Everyone was aware that something important, maybe even unforgettable, was about to happen. Ivanka, for her part, didn't appear intimidated. She sat upright, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. There was a subtle confidence in the way she glanced around the hall, making eye contact with other attendees, subtly asserting her presence. She was prepared, polished, and ready to engage. In her mind, she probably assumed she could control the conversation, direct it, and ensure that the focus remained on her perspective and the values she represented. She didn't seem to anticipate the challenge heading her way. As Jackson approached the podium, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. He didn't rush or announce anything dramatic. He simply began speaking in his signature calm and deliberate tone. At first, the conversation stayed general thoughts about leadership, the importance of honesty, and the responsibilities of those in power. Yet, there was an intensity beneath his words, subtle but unmistakable, as if he was preparing to address something larger, something personal, without giving away exactly what it would be. The audience, sensing the tension building, leaned in slightly. People began to notice the way Jackson's eyes remained on Ivanka, steady and unwavering. There was no malice in his gaze, but it carried the weight of expectation. He seemed to be silently saying, "Let's see if words match action. Let's see if honesty can withstand scrutiny." Even the most experienced political observers in the room felt a shiver of anticipation. By the time the conversation was about to turn toward specific issues, it was clear that this was not going to be a standard discussion. The tension was subtle, yet undeniable, a quiet pressure that had settled over the entire hall. Jackson was not here to entertain or to simply nod along politely. He was here to confront, to question, and to speak truths that few would dare to voice in such a high-profile setting. And as the audience watched him, they realized this was going to be a moment, remembered not for decorum, but for courage. When Jackson finally made direct eye contact with Ivanka, the room felt almost frozen. In time, that single moment, a calm, unwavering look, carried more weight than any speech or statement could. Everyone could feel it. Something significant was about to happen. In a space filled with powerful people, journalists, and influential figures, a simple glance had already begun to change the energy of the room. The stage was set. The unexpected encounter was just beginning, and no one in that hall would leave unchanged. The atmosphere in the hall was tense, a quiet hum of anticipation vibrating through the air. Everyone had come expecting a discussion about leadership and responsibility, but no one had prepared for the spark that was about to ignite. Ivanka Trump, sitting confidently in the front row, shifted slightly in her seat. Her eyes were sharp, and her smirk suggested she was ready to speak her mind. She had grown accustomed to commanding attention and steering conversations her way. She believed she could maintain control over this discussion, even with someone like Samuel L. Jackson on stage. As the conversation turned to the challenges of leadership in modern America, Ivanka leaned forward, her voice carrying just enough to be heard clearly across the hall. "Actors should stick to movies, not talk about issues they don't understand," she said. Her tone was light, but it carried a subtle edge, the kind that can make a comment sting more than it seems at first. The audience reacted immediately. A few gasps echoed through the room, some suppressed laughter, and then a heavy silence. It wasn't just a critique, it felt like a personal jab, a challenge aimed directly at Jackson's intelligence and credibility. The words weren't just meant to dismiss him, they were designed to belittle him in front of everyone. People could feel the weight of her statement pressing down on the discussion. Jackson, however, did not respond right away. His expression remained calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes. He tilted his glasses slightly, letting then slide down the bridge of his nose, and looked directly at her. That look, a combination of disbelief, firmness, and authority, made the room go quieter than ever. It was a pause that demanded attention. In that instant it became clear to everyone that this would not be a standard exchange. Ivanka, noticing the silence, maintained her composure, but there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. Her smirk remained, yet the confidence she carried began to feel challenged. She had expected a light retort, a polite rebuttal, or perhaps a laugh to dismiss her comment. Instead, she faced someone who could meet her boldness with quiet intensity, someone whose presence alone carried weight and authority. The tension in the room thickened as Jackson finally spoke, but not immediately in response to her comment. Instead, he let the words hang in the air, allowing the audience to feel the significance of the moment. He began speaking about leadership, about integrity, and the responsibility that comes with power. His words were measured, calm, and deliberate, but they carried a weight that made every listener lean forward subconsciously. He talked about the importance of actions over words, about how real leadership is measured by what people do, not what they say. It was a subtle reminder, but a powerful one. Ivanka's remark, though meant to cut him down, had unintentionally provided Jackson a stage to show the audience the contrast between performative confidence and genuine accountability. After a few sentences, Jackson's voice shifted ever so slightly, just enough to command attention. "Before you question anyone's integrity," he said, locking eyes with Ivanka, "you might want to prove certain claims with facts, not assumptions." The statement was pointed, yet it was delivered without anger or hostility. The calmness made it sharper, like a quiet hammer striking a solid surface. People in the audience felt it immediately. This was no ordinary exchange. Ivanka's smile faltered ever so slightly. She tried to recover with a light laugh, attempting to make the moment seem less serious, but the words had already landed. Jackson's calm, unwavering demeanor created a tension that could not be easily dismissed. The audience began to understand that this was more than a verbal spat. It was a test of courage, honesty, and authenticity in a room filled with influence and power. The exchange continued, though mostly in the form of Jackson speaking thoughtfully about broader issues. While Ivanka listened, her own words quieter now. Every sentence he uttered highlighted the contrast between rhetoric and action, between appearances and reality. The audience could sense a shift. The front row, usually commanding attention, now seemed momentarily unsettled. The polite decorum of the event had been replaced with raw, unfiltered accountability. People began to realize that Jackson wasn't interested in escalating a fight. He was using the moment to reveal truths about responsibility, integrity, and honesty. Not just for Ivanka, but for everyone listening. His words cut through the noise of politeness, reminding the audience that true leadership demands more than clever remarks or public charm. It demands courage, consistency, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. By the time this exchange had reached its peak, the energy in the room had changed. What began as a casual critique had transformed into a moment of reflection for everyone present. The heated exchange wasn't about personal victory. It was about exposing a reality that many preferred to ignore. Jackson had turned a sharp comment into an opportunity to teach, to challenge, and to remind everyone that leadership and honesty are not just buzzwords, they are actions. And in that charged, quiet moment, the audience understood that the conversation had gone far beyond expectations. This was no longer just a discussion about leadership or politics. It had become a lesson in courage, accountability, and the power of truth, all sparked by a single remark that could have ended the moment, but instead transformed it into something unforgettable. The room was quiet, the tension almost tangible. As Samuel L. Jackson leaned slightly forward, what had started as a sharp comment from Ivanka Trump had transformed into a moment that everyone could feel in their bones. People had come expecting discussion, debate, and perhaps even a little entertainment. What they were getting instead was something far more intense. A lesson in courage, honesty, and the stark contrast between words and action. Jackson spoke with calm authority, the kind of presence that makes people listen even before the words reach their ears. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout, and he didn't gesture wildly. His voice was steady, deliberate, and unyielding. And then he said the words that would freeze the room instantly. Before you question anyone's integrity, Ivanka, you might want to prove Bassett's parentage with a DNA test first. The words landed like a stone in a still pond. Silence followed immediately, deep and heavy. Cameras that had been clicking for the event's coverage paused. People instinctively held their breath, unsure how to react. The statement was bold, precise, and charged with a gravity that went beyond a personal attack. Everyone in the room understood the weight of it. Jackson's delivery was calm, but it carried the force of truth. There was no anger, no drama, just a clear, unwavering assertion of fact and principle. It was a reminder that words carry weight, especially when used to challenge integrity. In that moment, Jackson wasn't just responding to Ivanka's jab. He was confronting the larger issue of accountability in public life. He was highlighting the gap between those in power and the everyday struggles of ordinary citizens, a reality often overlooked when image and reputation take center stage. The audience began to absorb the meaning behind his words. It wasn't just about a DNA test or a family matter. It was about accountability. Jackson was pointing out that honesty matters not just as a concept, but as a standard that should guide actions. He was reminding everyone that millions of people were struggling to pay for basic needs, to secure safety and stability, while the powerful debated appearances and avoided the truth. There was a weight in the room that couldn't be ignored. Journalists, political observers, and public figures alike felt it. Jackson's words had shifted the energy from a heated exchange into a moment of reflection. No one could dismiss what he had said. The clarity and courage behind it demanded recognition. He continued, his voice steady, drawing a line between superficial politeness and real responsibility. He spoke about leadership and the obligations that come with influence. He reminded the audience that credibility is not given, it is earned through consistent honesty and transparent action. When leaders prioritize image over substance, society suffers. The people at the bottom of the economic ladder feel the consequences, while those at the top often remain insulated from the hardships they indirectly contribute to. Jackson's choice to make the statement calmly was strategic. It amplified its impact. When a person is calm, measured, and unwavering in their assertion, every word carries more power. The audience could feel the truth in what he said. It wasn't performative, it wasn't designed to entertain, and it wasn't designed to humiliate. It was a statement meant to expose reality and prompt reflection. As the silence lingered, one could see the shift in the room. People were no longer focused on politeness or protocol. Their attention was captured by the substance of what Jackson had said. The conversation that had started with tension had transformed into a moment that demanded introspection. Ivanka Trump's smirk had faded, replaced with a more guarded expression. Her reaction was subtle, but the room noticed it. Even someone accustomed to public scrutiny could not ignore the force of those words. Jackson's truth bomb went beyond the immediate participants. It resonated with everyone present. It was a reminder that speaking the truth, even when uncomfortable, matters. It was a reminder that accountability is universal. It applies to everyone, regardless of wealth, status, or family connections. The statement became a lesson in courage, a demonstration that honesty and integrity are not negotiable, even when surrounded by power and influence. By the time Jackson paused, the energy in the room had shifted completely. The heated exchange that had begun with a sharp remark from Ivanka had evolved into a defining moment, a moment where clarity, truth, and courage stood at the forefront. People were thinking not about gossip or insult, but about the larger meaning, the importance of integrity, the cost of avoiding truth, and the courage it takes to confront uncomfortable realities. For many in the audience, it was impossible to forget. Jackson had transformed a tense confrontation into a lesson in ethics and responsibility. The power of his words wasn't in drama or anger. It was in the unwavering, calm delivery of a truth that everyone could see, but few dared to voice. In that charged silence, the message was clear. Honesty matters more than image, and actions always speak louder than words. The moment hung in the air like a charged cloud, heavy and undeniable. Samuel L. Jackson's words had struck the room with a force that few could ignore. Silence had overtaken the audience, and even those who had been quietly confident found themselves leaning forward, listening closely. Ivanka Trump, who had begun the exchange with an air of poise and control, suddenly felt the weight of what had just been said. It was one thing to throw a sharp comment across the room. It was another to face a response that cut so deeply, so directly, that the power dynamics of the entire conversation shifted in an instant. At first, she tried to maintain composure. Her smile, which had once conveyed confidence and control, faltered slightly. It was subtle, but visible. A small crack in the polished exterior she had carefully crafted over years of public appearances and scrutiny. There was a pause, almost imperceptible, as she processed the statement. The room had gone completely silent, and in that silence, the weight of accountability pressed down on her. She attempted to brush it off with a laugh, a light, almost dismissive sound meant to deflect attention and restore her control over the conversation. "That's ridiculous. I don't need to prove anything to anyone," she said. The words were quick, confident, and sharp, meant to dismiss the accusation and signal that she would not be intimidated. On the surface, it seemed like an effective move. On the inside, however, the audience could sense the tension beneath her tone. Her words were precise, calculated, but the impact of Jackson's calm, unyielding delivery lingered. Jackson, however, was not done. He didn't need to raise his voice or issue threats. His presence alone carried authority. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on hers, and spoke again, calm but pointed. "You talk about honesty, yet you and your father both avoid the one test that would tell the truth. Why is that?" The room shifted again. The words were simple, but the meaning was undeniable. They exposed the gap between image and reality, between what is said publicly and what is done privately. This was not an attack born out of anger. It was a demand for accountability delivered in a tone that left no room for deflection. The statement challenged not only Ivanka, but anyone listening to confront the disparity between words and actions. The audience began to murmur quietly, a ripple of acknowledgement moving through the crowd. It was clear that this moment was no longer about politics, celebrity, or personal conflict. It had evolved into something larger, a reflection on integrity, responsibility, and the courage to speak and face the truth. Jackson's words had opened a space where the usual defenses of pride, image, and authority could no longer hold. People were paying attention not just to what was being said, but to the principles being highlighted. Ivanka's reaction shifted again. She realized that laughter, smirks, and dismissive remarks could not change the reality of the statement. The power of Jackson's words lay not in drama, but in their clarity and inevitability. She remained silent for a moment, a silence that spoke volumes. The audience noticed this immediately. Her silence carried the message that the usual tools of public composure, charm, confidence, and quick rebuttals were not enough to counter the truth that had been presented. Jackson continued speaking, not to humiliate, but to illuminate. He spoke about the larger implications of avoiding accountability, about how the absence of honesty in leadership affects ordinary people, families struggling to make ends meet, and the trust the public places in those in power. Each word reinforced the lesson that had begun with a single pointed truth, that integrity matters more than appearances, and courage is required to confront it. For Ivanka, the moment was defining. It was no longer about winning an argument or maintaining control. The room had shifted, and in that shift, she had to confront the weight of the accusation. She had no choice but to acknowledge it silently, if not verbally. In her silence, the audience could sense a mixture of reflection, awareness, and the realization that actions carry consequences, even for those who appear untouchable. The people in the room were affected, too. They were no longer thinking about celebrity or politics alone. They were considering the meaning of accountability and honesty. Jackson's words had created a pause in which everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, was asked to reflect on what it truly means to act with integrity. It was a rare and powerful moment, one that transcended the specifics of the argument and touched on a universal principle. Truth matters, and it cannot be avoided forever. As the silence stretched, the reality became clear. Ivanka's response, or lack thereof, spoke more than words ever could. It was a turning point, not just in the conversation, but in the atmosphere of the room. The dynamic had changed. Jackson's calm, unwavering challenge had shifted the focus from appearances to substance, from pretense to truth. Everyone in the room understood the significance. This was not a spectacle of insult or humiliation. It was a demonstration of courage, clarity, and moral accountability. The impact of that exchange would linger long after the event ended. Ivanka had faced a confrontation she could not dismiss, and the audience had witnessed a lesson in honesty and responsibility that was impossible to ignore. For a brief, unforgettable moment, the polished facade of control gave way to reality. In that room filled with influence, privilege, and power, Samuel L. Jackson had reminded everyone present that integrity is not optional, and that truth, when spoken boldly and calmly, commands attention, even from those accustomed to commanding it themselves. When the discussion finally ended, the room remained in an unusual, almost reverent silence. The energy that had filled the air during the exchange between Samuel L. Jackson and Ivanka Trump did not dissipate immediately. People moved slowly, whispering to one another in hushed tones, trying to process what had just happened. This was not a typical evening of speeches and polite applause. It had become a defining moment that no one in the room would forget. Jackson walked off the stage, his expression calm and composed, leaving behind more than just words. He left a message that carried weight. It was a reminder that courage in speaking the truth can be disarming, even in a room full of power and influence. The audience, composed of politicians, journalists, and public figures, had been forced to confront a truth that is often uncomfortable. Integrity and accountability are not optional, and evading them carries consequences that cannot be ignored. People weren't talking about gossip or celebrity drama anymore. Instead, they were discussing the principles Jackson had highlighted. What did it mean to act with honesty? How often do people in positions of power avoid tests, literal or figurative, that could reveal their true character? Jackson's statements had reframed the entire discussion, shifting it from politeness and political maneuvering to something much more profound: the question of responsibility. Ivanka Trump had chosen silence in response, and that silence itself spoke volumes. It became a symbol of the tension between image and action, between appearance and reality. Observers later noted that her reaction was a rare glimpse into the pressure even the most confident and practiced public figures face when confronted with truth. People recognized that Jackson's words were not just targeted at her personally, but at a larger culture in which power often shields people from accountability. Journalists in the room scribbled notes furiously, not about the drama, but about the lesson embedded in the moment. Jackson had reminded everyone present, and anyone who would hear about it later, that leadership and influence are meaningless without integrity. Appearances might command attention, wealth might command respect, but honesty is what ultimately earns trust. The impact was quiet but deep, leaving a lasting impression that would reverberate beyond the walls of the hall. Even those who had been skeptical at first began to reflect on the broader implications. Jackson had shown, without yelling or theatrics, that accountability is not just a personal matter, but a societal one. Every action, every choice, every moment of evasion affects real people. The millions struggling with poverty, inequality, and injustice. His truth bomb wasn't designed to humiliate. It was designed to provoke thought, to awaken awareness, and to remind everyone that real courage requires facing uncomfortable realities. And as people left the hall, the conversation shifted naturally. Attendees discussed what they had learned, what struck them, and what it meant for their understanding of leadership and power. Some spoke about Jackson's courage to speak plainly without hesitation in a world where words are often filtered, polished, or manipulated. Others reflected on the silence that followed Ivanka's failed attempts to dismiss the moment, recognizing that actions, or the lack thereof, reveal far more than speeches or statements ever could. Witnesses would later describe the impact in simple terms. Jackson hadn't just spoken. He had reminded everyone present that truth, when delivered calmly and courageously, cannot be ignored. People remembered the stillness, the quiet intensity, and the clarity of his words. They understood that even in a world dominated by image, celebrity, and politics, integrity still carries immense weight. For Ivanka Trump, the aftermath was undoubtedly a personal reckoning. The room's reaction, the whispers of reflection, and the realization that she could not dismiss the truth without consequence all made an impression. The exchange had shifted the narrative from confrontation to contemplation. It was a reminder that influence comes with responsibility, and that those who wield it without accountability risk not only criticism but exposure of the truth itself. In the days and weeks that followed, attendees carried the moment with them. The truth bomb had a ripple effect, inspiring conversations about leadership, honesty, and moral courage. Jackson's calm but unwavering stance became a benchmark for what it means to speak the truth, even when it challenges the powerful. People began to reflect on their own lives, their own roles in promoting integrity, and the difference between appearances and genuine action. And so, the room remained silent long after the event ended, not because people were shocked in fear, but because they were thinking, reflecting, and acknowledging a truth many prefer to avoid. Samuel L. Jackson had delivered more than a response. He had given a lesson in bravery, responsibility, and the enduring power of honesty. In a world where words are often cheap and promises even cheaper, He had reminded everyone that truth cannot be silenced and that those who avoid it will ultimately face its consequences. For everyone present, the memory of that evening would remain vivid. The words, the pause, the quiet intensity, all of it became a lasting reminder that honesty and courage still matter. Samuel L. Jackson hadn't just dropped a truth bomb on Ivanka Trump. He had dropped a truth bomb on the room, the audience, and the very idea of leadership itself. It was a moment that would not be forgotten.